Welcome to Vanadium. It's a crazy world out there, my friends, but we're going to get through it together. So tonight's edition of Vanadium will be Vanadium on literature, specifically a book by a lady called Ayn Rand called The Fountainhead. And Ayn Rand is a very famous novelist who didn't write that many novels, but is very famous in the political world. And you might have heard her intellectual offspring, Rand Paul, was actually named after Ayn Rand. Ron Paul named his kid after this author. So Atlas Shrugged is probably her most famous book that everybody cites because it's the most political. But I doubt very many people have actually gotten through that book because it's pretty much unreadable. The Fountainhead's a pretty good book. It's really interesting. It's really fun to read. It's romantic. There's a lot of really interesting characters. And it's kind of a little bit rebel rock and roll. You know, the main character, Howard Roarke, he's a badass. And he takes no fucking prisoners. And he does what he wants. He's a real artist. He's a scientist, engineer, artist, a builder, all in one man. It's a fascinating book. And, you know, it came to me at an interesting time. Almost 20 years ago, I was a younger man. Not quite knee-high to a June bug, but a much younger man. And it's actually when I bought this book. It's kind of hung. It looks exactly the same. It's weathered well. But I met a girl, an older woman at that age, and she was already well into the world, a working professional. And she was talking about the books of Ayn Rand. And I wasn't intimately familiar with the literature of Ayn Rand then. I just sort of knew that the people who liked it were among circles that I wasn't so cozy with. Not that I say I hated them, but I found it to be sort of a creepy intellectual group. And I don't think it's her fault, and I don't think it's the fault of the literature, and I don't think you should throw out the baby with the bathwater. That's another message. There's a lot of takeaways from the Vanadium show, but this is another one. This is a really good book. A great romantic book with some really great characters. And I'm just going to kind of talk about it. It's really long. It took me I remember going through it over the summer. I remember this was anyway, back to my story. About 20 years ago, she was saying, oh, this is like the greatest book ever. And I'm like, oh, okay. So whatever. I picked it up one day at a bookstore, at a Barnes & Noble, a brick and mortar store, as they used to call them back in the day. Picked this book up, and I was expecting to find it unreadable and to not be interested at all. But reading about Howard Roarke and his nemesis, Peter Keating, his love interest, Dominique Francon, and his basically war against the establishment, and in both his academic life and his working life, and what it is to be an artist, and actually what the pain of having integrity. You get it very quickly in the book. And I could not put this thing down. And I read and I chipped away at it. I really kind of loved. It was one of the most pleasurable times of reading I've ever had. And I won't say that there aren't times where the writing is a bit tedious. She's a brilliant writer, but she belabors some points in the books. I don't know why I'm shitting on the book as the beginning of the review of one of my favorite books. But I'm just trying to get it out there that, anybody, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whatever your political opinion, whatever you think of a lot of the people who are the objectivists, which is sort of like a lot of the basis for a lot of libertarian philosophies, which at their core, there's nothing wrong with. And I don't really have a problem with. I'm more of a classical liberal, but I don't have a problem with the philosophy. I believe it's really about artistic integrity. So a rundown of the story. Howard Roarke is growing up. He's in architecture school, and he's getting ready to graduate, and he's not getting along with the faculty there too much because he's doing his own thing. He's a little bit rock and roll. He's making some new kind of designs, some modern stuff, some crisp, elegant, minimalist designs, whereas in the world they're trying to imitate some Baroque and all that, crazy shit from back in the day in Europe, old Europe, all that Gothic architecture and stuff. People were just still trying to imitate it. He wanted to do a new thing. The faculty was like, no, we don't like your shit, Howard Roarke. His name is like Howard Roarke. And he's not like an overly handsome dude. He's kind of like a skinny, like kind of wrangly dude, but he's very smart. He's very quiet. And he's sort of at the top of his class, but he's also flunking out at the same time. which is sort of interesting. And there were a bunch of like really great students that were kind of like that kind of rode the limits. Like Albert Einstein was one of those cases who didn't really fare very well in academia. But anyway, at the same time, his classmate, Peter Keating, is at the top of the class. The faculty loves Peter Keating, right? And all the girls love Peter Keating. Peter Keating is just everyone's biggest favorite young architect. He's already on the Young Architects Worldwide Journal. All the people are fawning all over him. His mother loves him. She dotes on him dutifully. Everybody loves him. He's everybody's hero. Howard Roarke lives a totally lonely existence on his own, studying on his own and just sort of building and shit on his own. In addition, cutting his own rocks and shit on his own. Like, in addition to designing the architecture, he's like, I got to get to know rocks and I got to get to know the cement and mortar. So he would like sleep on the cement and stuff. The guy is hardcore. Howard Roarke, he's the hero of the book. His nemesis, Peter Keating, the pretty boy, handsome, charming, elegant. Finishes his education, gets all the right jobs. Howard Roarke flunks out at the very end because he just says, fuck the faculty, doesn't go to graduation, doesn't do all the things he's supposed to do to graduate. So he gets his first job. He has trouble getting his first job. Peter Keating goes out and has no trouble, lands his job at the best architecture firm in the world, right? Howard Roarke has to basically like forage for survival. He has to work in a fucking gravel pit to make money. And he finally gets his first job basically by showing his designs to some crazy architect who was kind of an artist like himself, a master sort of. So it's like a master and apprentice thing. So he learns from this master architect who really sees the greatness in Howard Roarke's work. And at the same time, he's still having to really struggle because this guy's not giving him anything. He's giving Howard nothing. I mean, he's really kind of, it's like firing Howard in the furnace, to kind of just like treat him and get him to be stronger, but not really like helping and shaping him or anything. But it's a different kind of tutelage, cruel tutelage, if you will. Kind of reminds me of Pai Mei in the Kill Bill movies. But Howard Roarke fares very well with this little internship and designs some really crazy, awesome stuff. And ends up getting a respectable job the same way in a firm that's not comparable to the one that Peter Keating has just basically has handed to him. So he's now equal in the ranks, having never actually gone through the graduation and the ass kissing and all the shit that Peter Keating had to do. And at the same time, there's this lady. She's real pretty. Her name is Dominique Francon. All right, she's the love interest of both of the characters, right? And she marries Peter Keating because he's the most successful and handsome dude. What else is a girl supposed to do? But she hates him pretty much from the start. And if I were a feminist, a feminist might look at some aspects of this book and think that the female character in this book is a little sort of one-dimensional. And even Ayn Rand has said some things herself about the function of a woman is to worship a man. No, I think that minimizes the role of a woman in the world, to put it mildly. But Ayn Rand had some very controversial philosophies, but I don't think she fully believed that. I think as she was saying that, she was trying to just kind of piss everybody off. I think she was a bit of a rock star and kind of a rebel herself. And she wrote this book in 1945 or 43. I forget, one of those. But either way, the world was crazy back then. I mean, the world was in chaos. And it's a little bit like it is now. It's a relevant book. And the book is about philosophy. So it was considered like philosophical literature. So Dominique marries Peter Keating, but she basically loves Howard Roarke, kind of quietly. But she hates on him basically for this. Goes on for hundreds of pages. All right. Hundreds of pages. So as the book goes on, it's the story of these guys and their careers and how different they are and how they take form. One guy is nurtured and supported by the entire establishment by just doing basically what people did in the past. That's Peter Keating. He's the establishment guy. Howard Roarke constantly struggles to find work and has to take like a lot of like shitty architecture assignments initially, but kind of does a great job and ends up doing some really big assignments. And at one point, he designs something, and the people who take the design change it into something that is whack, a little bit similar to like Peter Keating's designs. So he just blows that shit up with fucking dynamite. And then when he defends himself in court, he goes, it's my right, it's my design, they fucked it up. Man, I'm a builder. They shit on my design. And the judge is like, you make a good point, Howard, you're free to go. And they made some movies out of this, ladies and gentlemen. There's been a few movies, but there's some courtroom scenes where he talks to the judge. He's like, listen, judge, it's pretty ridiculous, all right? You got to suspend some disbelief in some of these scenes. Now, in the book, there's a villain, and the villain's very interesting. Ellsworth Toohey is his name. And people say that he's the quintessential liberal, like a bleeding heart liberal. And the book kind of does write him that way, right? Because he's a social worker, right? And he's a writer, right? He's more of a journalist, but he works with this other lady who's a social worker. And there's some other minor characters in the book. But he's really concerned with trying to uplift people. But in the book, that's really code for just sort of like holding them down by not really giving them proper opportunities, by giving them just sort of a meager way to survive without giving them a way to really thrive. And by doing that consciously, he's a true villain in the real villain sense. He's trying to restrict basically the natural change and the evolution of society. And that's how she wrote a real liberal character. And the other characters, Howard Roarke, and this is even more true. These ideas are even more true in Atlas Shrugged. Problem is, I can't read that fucking book because it's unreadable and it's too fucking boring and it's longer than this one. And this one, believe me, I love the book, but it takes a lot of attention. I'm a busy man. But it's really good, and there are some interesting scenes in this. One of the scenes is there's a love scene, where Howard first gets his hands on Dominique. She basically is like, she's mad at Peter Keating, and she's like, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go find Howard. So she does. Actually, no, I remember it wrong. No, he kind of finds her, right? And he kind of rapes her. He's very rough. The book it's not a tender love scene. And I'm not the first one to say this. It's not a radical interpretation on my part. But anyway, she loves it. And she kind of loves the strong upper hand. It's interesting. I could see, it being a little bit controversial. I'm just looking at some of my notes here. So Dominique Francon basically just chases the two main characters around. And as soon as Howard really gets it together and builds his big shit and is like towering to the top of the world, she's like, you know what? Now it's time for me to get on board. So that's basically the end of the book. So Howard really does take the fucking world by the balls by the end of the book. But the whole world is basically shitting on him the entire time. And he's basically like, fuck you, I'm not changing. So in a way, you think about it, it's kind of opposite from a typical story with a prototypical hero, where a hero starts off a certain way and he's got to adapt. And it's about what kind of form does that adaptation take? That's the hero's journey. This is a different hero's journey. This is the world coming to terms with fucking Howard Roarke and how Howard Roarke wants it. It's completely different. And I'm going to do another bit on Top Gun, because Top Gun is a similar thing. Basically, it's the world coming to terms with the way Maverick wants things. And I also love that too. I don't know what that says about me. Ayn Rand is a really interesting lady. She's the writer. Obviously, if you read the woman is oozing intelligence and a lot of anger, and she went through a lot of stuff as a young kid. She basically she went through a revolution where she saw a lot of people around her just killed during the Russian Revolution. And what she went through really shaped her political philosophy and the way she talked about things, and she was very much a hardliner. Watch her interview. She did an interview with Phil Donahue. And it was in you can actually get it on YouTube. It's free. Phil Donahue is a cool guy. He did some really crazy interviews. He interviewed a bunch of crazy Satanists. And if you're a conspiracy theorist, which I am, I'm a conspiracy brother. And we got another one of those coming out, by the way. He did an interview with some interesting things that have to do with the whole, basically Pizzagate, etc. I won't go into that on this podcast, but Phil Donahue is a great journalist. Still is a great journalist. I hope he's still alive. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, he was thrown off TV for being anti-war. The Fountainhead was one of those books that I kind of, when I read, I was like, I don't know. I feel kind of funny about some parts of this, but I also sort of love the hero of the book. I love his message and how he really just wants to do his own thing. He doesn't want anything from anybody. And he's willing to take nothing. And it's a hard life. Even his success it's not comfortable. Nothing in his life is ever comfortable. And you read it and it's like, God damn, you're my hero, but is that the kind of life I want to live? So it's not a life that it's meant to be totally emulated. Also, you couldn't imagine destroying like entire buildings and putting the whole entire public at risk. I don't know if he killed anybody with his little blast, but going and arguing in front of court that just they fucked up your design by putting in the wrong like window frames. And that's why you blew up half the city. I don't know how that would go over in court even nowadays. So, but there's another really interesting character in the book called Gail Wynand, who's it's the rags to riches story in the book. So she's trying to show you a guy who started off as nothing, dirt poor, and actually worked his way with just sheer determination. And instead of doing the artistic thing like Howard did, the engineer approach, building and shit, basically ran a newspaper, but like more of like a shitty newspaper, like a more of a gossip rag. And it sort of just works, fed off the gossip, fed off the public to the worst aspects of journalism. Probably would have been something I read. But he made a ton of money. And his basic thing was he loved showing that everybody was corruptible. And he took a real interest in Howard Roarke and tried to corrupt him and make him as shitty as him and everybody else, all the other rich people. But Howard wouldn't take the bait, never did. And Gail Wynand was fascinated with fucking Howard for half the book. And that's really, there's nothing really happens. There's no real arc to that. It's just Gail's like, this motherfucker really can't be broken. And it's just really the book's an illustration. It's not so much a story as a philosophical illustration of what this lady thinks in her sort of moral imagination. And it is something to behold. Ayn Rand, watch her interviews. That lady is rock and roll. She's punk rock. She does not give a fuck. The audience at one point is hating on her because she's like, you know what? A woman's place is behind a man. Basically. To an audience that is like, this is like fresh, people were like, women were finally getting treated decently in the workplace. So it was like a hot issue. I guess it's always been a hot issue, but back then especially, and she was saying it to an audience and they were like, boo. She's like smoking a cigarette on stage being like, fuck you, in a Russian accent. I mean, it's a piece of work. Watch the interview. I'm gonna have to find a link and put it there. It is, the Fountainhead is, I don't know how the audiobooks are. There's a movie, there are a couple different movies. I don't know about it. You try to watch it and you're kind of like, this works less in movie form than it does in book form. It's kind of hard to, it's really, it's the whole tone of it doesn't play well in movie form. A cartoon would probably work the best for it. No one's tried that yet. But Atlas Shrugged, if anybody's, I doubt a lot of people that are like touting that book and saying, oh, I love Atlas Shrugged, it's the best. I wonder how many of them actually got through the whole thing. Because this is a little bit of a tough read. And, and she does belabor a lot of points, but there are some really great descriptions. And she has a funny way of being, basically derisive and shitting on ideas and people that she doesn't like. Kind of like that. Woman after my own heart that way. Fountainhead, man. This is a tome, but I recommend it. And I think that, it'd be a good thing to talk to your kids about. Maybe even read. You don't need to read the whole thing, but maybe read some parts. Maybe read the part where he's in court talking about arguing with a judge about why he's allowed to blow up buildings and how the judge is like, okay, Howard, teach kids the art of persuasion. And it's the romance, the end of it is particularly romantic. They go up in this elevator, Howard and Dominique. She's the beautiful blonde. She just essentially just worships the dudes in the book. And she's real pretty. That's really all that carries in the book. She's smart too. And she has incisive wit and wisdom, but it's really just in terms of dissecting these dudes. That's really what the entire character is about. And if it had been if Norman Mailer had written that, people would have been like, yeah, fucking typical. But no, she was a very tough lady that wrote this book, and she had some very interesting, very still to this day, wild and controversial ideas. And the villain in it is worth examining. And think about some of the people that would embody Ellsworth Toohey, and how there'd be a lot of them in the schools, in academia, and how a lot of them, you could see that there's an aspect of sort of rot to it, and a sort of a parasitism, a sort of a dying on the vine, something that's corroding the force of life. It's a good glimpse into what evil, I think, really is. And she does a good job with a villain who doesn't raise his voice, doesn't kill anybody, he's not violent. He's a villain with his fucking ideas. And he's probably a villain to the people around him and his family. But that's not really what the book's about. It's about his ideas and his work. So I just lost video, but this is Vanadium on literature. And have a pleasant evening, ladies and gentlemen.